Hey guys, what's up? Chris here for BeerGeekNation.com, and guess what? Today we are finally going to talk about cellaring beer. I get questions all the time. Why don't you make a video on cellaring beer? Well, I'm doing it right now. So, why do you cellar beer? That's the big question. What cellaring is going to do to beer when properly cellared? It's actually going to help round out beers, maybe beers that are going to be a little bit too hot, like higher ABV beers. It's going to help kind of round out the overall flavors. The actual profile, the malt profile is going to change a little bit. It's just going to become a very much more cohesive beer. Flavors are going to start to come together. Maybe some flavors might dull a little bit, or maybe some flavors are going to intensify a little bit, but it's just going to change the beer, make it more cohesive, make it more rounded, and just kind of mellow everything out. And that's really what cellaring does. So what beers do you sell, or how do you cellar? I guess some of the ideal, and this is, cellaring properly is actually really, really hard for someone at home. The tough part about cellaring is the temperature. You want it between about 45 and 55 degrees year round. So summer, winter, it's got to be between 45 and 55 degrees ideally. At that temperature, the beer is not going to age too quickly, but it still is going to age a little bit. Anything colder than that, you're not cellaring the beer, you're actually preserving the beer. So the flavors are going to stick around. Anything warmer than that, and the beer is going to age much, much quicker than it would be. And you're going to get some maybe off flavors, maybe a little bit of oxidization because the beer is going to be in warmer temperatures. So that kind of that Goldilocks temperature is 45 to 55 degrees. And that's tough. That's really tough to hold. I know, admittedly, my beer is not at that. My beer usually is around 60 degrees year round. In the winter, it might dip down to like 55, 50 in that area. It's in my back, unfinished part of my basement. But it's tough. One thing, if you don't have a huge cellar, maybe you can get an old stand-up freezer, get a temperature regulator on it so they can keep that, maybe put a heating pad in there. So in the winter, you can keep it at 50 degrees year-round, the heating pad in the winter. In the summer, it'll just kick on. It'll control the temperature based on the temperature controller to keep it at 50. So that's definitely one way to go. I've seen people that make, in their basement, put air conditioners in the back room that kind of close off an area and put an air conditioner in there. That's another way to do it. But it's tough. It's really tough. But that's really the number one. I think that's probably the biggest thing is the temperature. You want to have between 45 and 55 degrees ideally, and there are many, many ways to do that. The other thing is lack of light. You want it to be completely dark. So if it's in, you don't have the ability to put it in a dark room, put it in boxes, like wine boxes that wine come in, they have, the 12 dividers, put it in there maybe. Closets are always good, but again, with the closet, you're gonna have the issue with the temperature. So really, they're the two big things, light and temperature. That's really what's gonna determine your cellaring ability. Now, what beers can you cellar and what beers can't you cellar? Well, beers you can cellar. You would think it would be pretty obvious, but not entirely. So obvious, let's talk about the obvious ones. Imperial stouts, barley wines, big, malty, higher ABV beers are the ideal candidates to be cellared. Imperial stouts, like I said, barley wines, any of those kind of beers, barrel-aged beers, for the most part, are going to be very cellarable. Then it gets a little tricky. It's not... If a beer is a high ABV beer, doesn't necessarily mean that you can cellar it. It's a pretty good indicator, except for a couple cases, and I'll get to that in a second. But you can also cellar lower ABV beers, obviously. But those lower ABV beers, you're going to look for beers like Brett beers, wild beers, a lot of the different Belgian-style beers, bottle-conditioned Belgian-style beers. They're going to age fantastically over time, and they don't have to be high ABVs because, like wild ales, the Brett and the yeast, the lacto, and all that stuff, that's going to develop over time. And those typically aren't high ABV beers. You're talking 5-6%. That's fine as long as it's a wild ale, a Brett beer, any Belgian beer. They're awesome. Bottle conditioned beers are another thing you want to look for. You can cellar those a little bit longer, again, depending on the style. So really, you want to look for imperial stouts, barley wines, anything imperial except for IPAs. And I'll get to that in a second. A lot of Belgian stuff, a lot of wild beers, bottle conditioned stuff, again, depending on the style, but that's a pretty good base. I mean, you kind of get the idea. The higher ABV beers are going to be the ones that you're going to be able to cellar. With the exception, and these are the things you don't want to cellar, you never want to cellar hoppy beers. No hoppy beers. Hoppy beers are meant to be drank fresh. Do not cellar them. Even if it's like a 10 or 11% triple IPA, don't cellar it. Drink it. See, that's what I'm saying. Like it is say 10% or whatever, so you're thinking, it'll be great to cellar. No, it's going to hold up longer, because they do have to put more malts, more hops into it. So it's definitely going to hold up longer, but it is something that you want to keep in the fridge. You want to drink fresh, definitely. So never, ever, ever cellar any hoppy beers. Again, some of the other styles you might not want to cellar, like, I don't know, lagers, not all lagers, but like Kolsch's or Pilsners. You don't want to you don't want to cellar like Hefeweizens or like amber ales or, brown ales. Really, again, like lower ABV stuff, with the exception, like I said, of wild beers, Brett beers, some of the Belgian stuff, bottle conditioned stuff. You really don't cellar. So that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. Like I said, the hardest part is the temperature control. So light, make sure they're in dark. Temperature control between 45 and 55 degrees. If you don't, have that temperature range, they're going to age quicker. So let's talk about that. How long can you actually age a beer, cellar a beer? Well, it's going to be determined by a lot of things: alcohol percentage, type of beer, etc., etc. The general consensus is you don't want to age a beer more than about 5 years, and that's a pretty broad range for a lot of different styles. Obviously, there are other styles you can age much longer, like lambics, wilds, Brett beers, again, because those flavors are going to continue to develop over time. But usually between 3 and 5 years for most beers is going to be about your maximum. After that, the beers just start to tank. You're going to get oxidization. You're going to get a lot of cherry flavor, some kind of weird malty flavors. So, between 2 and 3 years is probably ideal. 5, I wouldn't go much more than 5. Again, unless it's one of those rare cases where it is, like a Belgian beer, a bottle conditioned beer, a wild beer, or, stuff like that. So that's about it. I'm trying to think if I covered all the bases. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment in the section below or shoot me an email at beergeeknation.com. I would try to get back to you, and I'll try to answer the comments in the section. I'll try to reply to the comments, all the comments in the section below, in case you guys do have questions. So hope that clears it up. Cellaring beer can be, it's a cool thing. The hardest part is actually keeping it in the cellar. I know right now my cellar is just stopped. I've got so much beer back there, and a lot of it is older than 5 years. A lot of it's probably not real great anymore. I've got to do like a cellar cleaning. I got to do a cellar video too, let you guys see what it actually looks like. So that's coming up. So that's it, guys. Drinking an IPA here. Don't age this. Remember what I said. Don't age hoppy beers. Very bad. Keep them in the fridge. Drink them fresh. End of story. So with that said, folks, remember life's too short. Drink amazing beers. Cheers.